How appropriate that it comes with Corona. So now getting all these guys back together and throwing in a Tango 2 back there as well, because that's kind of more of a modern, more not modern, but just more recent controller in this industry. Let's go over the workability of each one, just workability ratings. And again, that previous review of the internals, I'm not an engineer of any sort. I've just looked at a lot of internals and I just looking at the differences between the controllers, and that's what my eye caught when I took a look at them. Maybe you know better. If you do, please put it in the description below. I'm happy to update this or make your comment like top or whatever. But it's nice to see what the internals look like. It does kind of show how much thought may have gone into the actual process of designing the controller. So starting with the FrSky controller, the fit and finish and feel, this is still, this particular one, not the blue one, but I have another one that has my crossfire on the back, full-size crossfire. It's very easy to solder into it, and it does function with just a little bit of a software update. Basically, out of the box, this controller is useless to me, but with a minor adjustment to the software and a minor mod to it, I can get my full crossfire to work with it. And so this is my primary controller, not this exact one, but another one. I have two of them because it's a really nice fit to my hands. It does not have full-size gimbals, but it does have the next largest size gimbals after full-size gimbals. There's actually very few controllers that have full-size gimbals, but I'll get to that in a minute. So this is still my primary, and I would give this the best workability rating still because it's really easy to get the clamshell of the controller apart and get it back together. The wires in there, while they're not quite the highest quality, the Radiomaster does feel like it has nicer wires. The connectors are bigger, easier to work on, and the wires are huge, so it's just really easy to work on, even though it has the least space on the inside. It has kind of all the things that I need, except for very annoyingly the D16 and D8 protocol of the actual binding. So that's one of the things that FrSky did that really annoyed a lot of people, and it's one of the reasons why people generally just don't like FrSky anymore, and I'm kind of part of that camp, except for the fact that they have been doing this for a while. They do know how to make a controller, and that's my controller at this point still. However, I have been running DJI more and more, and I haven't even included that in this bunch because it's just a totally different system. So I would say my time using or FPV in general is probably about 75% DJI and 25% analog, and the analog is just the micro stuff, just the baby tooth, the TP3 and whoops and things. Moving on to the jumper radio. This is a somewhat special one because it's the first one of this grouping of radios that have come out that uses this plastic casing, which is heavily inspired, I believe, by Futaba, which they shouldn't really get a free ride for, but I guess nobody has complained quite as much as FrSky, because FrSky has been a bit of a hypocrite because I think Jumper or somebody sort of somewhat replicated-ish the internals, or they actually didn't. They just used OpenTX, which FrSky thinks they own, but it's technically open source and it can be forked and used wherever you want, just like Betaflight, just like any other open source. The workability rating of this controller is the lowest of all these radios because it does use ribbon cables, and yeah, that's about it. The gimbals are fine. They are smaller. I actually don't like the gimbals at all, but they are smaller. They're the smallest gimbals of all these controllers that I'm showing here. So this was previously the best value controller, and it's still fantastic. And if you have this, don't buy anything else because it's not going to help you do anything more. But I would put this at the bottom of these controllers that I'm showing here, even though it's completely okay. Moving on to the Radiomaster. Actually, let's talk about the Tango 2 first. So the Tango 2 is a special controller because it's a little bit different. It's a very lot bit different. It is easily the best feeling in the hand, in my opinion, and I love it, except for the fact that it doesn't have the ability to use full-size crossfire, and we can't use it on whoops. Now, I have been working on a couple of things that are going to make crossfire and whoops sort of ubiquitous, so that's really not going to be a big issue moving forward soon, but it's not here yet. And yeah, I do like this controller a lot. However, it is annoying that I can't run my full-size crossfire. You will probably never need full-size crossfire unless you're doing really crazy things, but in my area, my radio environment is awful, and I really like having the confidence of full crossfire. Basically, I want the full thing just because it exists, and that's my disease. So moving on to the, oh yeah, another thing about the jumper is that it's really nice to be able to access the gimbal like adjustments from the inside. And something you may notice here is that the gimbal is actually right there. It's really easy to access the screws. And we'll see the difference between the Radiomaster. I also can't get this dumb rubber thing back on here because my rubber feet got all messed up. So whatever, it is what it is. So now looking at the Radiomaster, the backside, it's got a lot more space there for a battery than the jumper. And it also has that built-in module, so you get to have 2 modules on there as well. And another significant difference between the jumper and the Radiomaster is that they have added these huge bars to grip. And that was actually one complaint. It's interesting they added that because that was actually one significant complaint that I had about the jumper, is that those thin little slivers on the back here make it really hard to grip when you're pinching, and hard to use when pinching in another way as well. But they also include this project box if you don't get the version that comes with Crossfire, which is really nifty because if you are doing crazy radio stuff, it's really useful to have this little box that can just pop on there with whatever module you want to put into it, and it's got like screws. I mean, it's actually a workable little unit, which is nice. These bumps on the sides, while they do seem like they make the controller thicker, they're actually really helpful to grip with thumbers and pinchers, because this lip on the edge is really nice and easy to wrap your fingers around. And one of the main complaints I had about pinching on the jumper was that it's just really like a box. It doesn't quite fill your hand up nicely, and even pinching, there isn't quite enough there to kind of grip properly. So that's really nice about that. I know it's taken me forever to get to this point, but honestly, this video could have been 5 times longer. But let's actually go over this particular radio, the Radiomaster, which is the whole point of this video. I'm not going to go over every feature in detail because you probably already know, and I'm only going to point out features that are really meaningful to me. First and foremost, the plastic finish of the controller is similar to the other controllers. There's really nothing about this controller that is particularly, about the plastic, at least the casing is, that's particularly better or worse. It also borrows the same mold as the jumper controller back there, which is very much inspired by Futaba, which again shouldn't get a free ride, but in this case it's just a product of the industry, which is just pushing for more and more and cheaper, and these manufacturers just keep obliging instead of just doing their own thing. I'll talk about that at the end of this a little bit more before the internal discussion. I actually flipped this video around. I recorded this after I flipped it around, so let's continue on. So the casing is totally fine. What is kind of cheapy feeling are the buttons, but all the buttons on all these controllers, including the Tango 2, feel relatively cheapy. The Tango 2's buttons feel the best, but it's not like a nice luxury car or something. They just feel cheapy. The switches are totally fine. The potentiometers are really thin feeling. They don't really have weight to them very much. These are all buttons on top. There's so many freaking switches and things all over this. Something really nice about the controller is that it does have USB charging for the 18650 cells that it'll take. And I think it'll actually fit 21700 cells in there as well if you wanted to do that. But it does have USB charging. You can see here it's got 3 wires going to it, so it can fully charge the USB port. It's got the SD card in there and these other things for programming and whatnot. And it's got USB-C as well, which is really nice to have in there because you may have GoPros and you can kind of consolidate. It also has a USB-C on top here, which is used for simulators, which is really nice so that you don't have a wire underneath your controller, wrapping around yourself awkwardly. The main feature to the external of this controller, I would say, which is the best thing here, is the gimbals. The fact that they are completely full throw gimbals. There are not a lot of controllers on the market, shockingly, that have full travel on the gimbals. Now, in the internal discussion, you'll see that this particular controller is extra special because these gimbals are actually really shallow for how large their travel is. They've got a nice front on them. They look good. I assume they're sort of mimicked after the M7 gimbals because it's got kind of the same finish on it. But whatever it is, these gimbals look good. They are very smooth feeling. Smooth is a really awful term, but they move without any friction. And I removed the friction from my throttle as well, so they are very nice and easy to move. However, as you'll see in the internal discussion, I'm not a fan of the springs and how loose the tension is. This tension on the FrSky controller is definitely a lot higher, and I have my tension set at maximum. So That's one aspect that is making me not want to use this one. But the tension is also totally fine. I could get used to it after, I did get used to it after a couple of flights. So it really is a moot point. No point to even bring it up. However, I do know that I feel like most people, at least the ones I know, prefer stronger tension in the springs. So I would hope that they increase the tension ability in these springs. And that really is the main feature of this controller, is that it has full-size gimbals. All the other controllers I've shown don't have full-size gimbals. They claim to, but they are not full throw, full travel. It's not like a significant difference, but it is a huge pet peeve of mine because I am a pincher. I got huge hands, and I, dagnammit, want the full travel of my gimbals so that I have the maximum amount. We're already controlling these things through these rudimentary system. I want full travel on my gimbals, and I want to set it however I want. Maybe you don't like that, and if you don't, you got tons of controller options. But in my world, this is awesome, and this is the one thing that really draws me to this radio, because it is really important for me to have full travel gimbals. However, it is also important for me to not have such a mammoth size controller. And so if you compare the thicknesses of these controllers, these two, the Radiomaster and the Jumper, obviously use the same casing, so they're the same thickness. However, the Radiomaster has this bump on the bottom, which is actually more of a help than not. The FrSky controller is actually not that far behind, but it is a little bit smaller and a little bit easier to hold. Overall, the size of this controller is large, and I haven't heard many people complain about the Jumper or a Futaba controller, because those are all thick, and the Taranis X9D has been historically one of the most popular controllers in the entire industry ever to be in the industry, and not a lot of people complain about that. So I don't know if the size is really going to be a big deal. However, because the gimbals, as you'll see on the internal discussion, are very, very shallow, I think they could have hacked a good 2 centimeters off the thickness of this controller, and I personally believe that would make this thing a lot easier to hold. Now, of course, the battery bay may have shrunken. Maybe they could have kept the center the same thickness and just shrunken the sides to actually make it easier to hold. I don't know. But looking at everything else, as I pointed out, it's got every single switch and everything you could possibly imagine. Now let's turn it on, and I'll show you that when you turn it on, it's got OpenTX. It has this massive, massive screen that you cannot see outdoors because it's an LCD, and it's totally fine. I don't fly planes, I don't fly helicopters, I don't do weird robotic projects anymore. By the way, the light changes on these buttons up here when you click them. So I don't see value in this screen. Maybe you do, and this controller gives you all the kitchen sinks in existence and everything in it. Maybe you like it. I personally don't like it. I wish they would have just hacked off the entire screen and done something else with the battery, which I explained to them what I would do, my little battery mod. But yeah, overall, this controller isn't the one for me, but I think that if there is anybody looking for a controller and is going to get one controller and really wants it to be like the end-all controller for them, this is awesome. There's no option out there that I would recommend over this for a beginner that's just looking for a real radio and doesn't really know if they want to do FPV or only FPV or line of sight and weird robotic projects or other things maybe. This is such a versatile controller that you really will only need this one, and you can do everything. Now, obviously, there are other controllers on the way as well. I know there's the T18 or something coming from Jumper as well. It's got some other tricks and things in it. But this one really is like the first controller that I've seen since the FrSky X9D that has like everything on it, and it's actually easy to work on and it's good. And so it really does get my recommendation in this time. And it looks good, feels good, it's got everything. It's got some issues here and there, but they're not really huge issues. The software is full OpenTX. It's not a touchscreen. There might be a touchscreen version. And if you go through this, it's got that multi-module inside of it, which is, it's got like every single protocol imaginable. And what's real funny is that this thing also comes with Corona. It's got Corona. It's got Corona V1. But actually, whatever this Corona is has every single option here has like multiple sub options. So it really has so many things, and the range on it is not bad. it's pretty good. The only thing that in here that's really important to me is the fact that it does, and I don't even know what FrSky X2 is, but it's got D16 and D8, and it actually binds real nicely to whoops and whatnot, and it's got vibration also as well. So that's really the most important feature to me of the internal module. Other than that, this is really, like, there's nothing I can say that would break this deal for me, because it doesn't do anything particularly wrong. It's not to my taste, but it doesn't do anything wrong. So that's like the real review of this controller, and the rest of this video is really like, you can stop because I don't know if it's going to give you much value, but I think this is a great first start for Radiomaster re-entering the market of controllers. Maybe they're working on something else that's different, who knows. But that's, I'm going to stop with this here and then go to the internal discussion, and up to you if you want to continue. Thanks for watching. Bye. I'm going to start this video with something that's probably a little unusual. I don't think many people look inside their controllers and see what's actually in there, but it's a really nice indication of how much attention to detail the manufacturer may have paid in designing or preparing the controller for manufacturing. And before getting started, I'm going to plug my Patreon, but it's not a plug specifically to get people to join. It's just a plug to thank my Patreons, both for their support, but more so for their interaction and discussion on my Patreon page, because I didn't realize this for a long time, that I could actually share exclusive content with just my Patreons. And I've been doing that lately, and it's like a new outlet for me to be able to share the things I'm working on, the things I'm actually moving forward with and trying to get out into the market, without having too much worry about various manufacturers catching wind of what I'm doing. So I just thank them very much. Join if you want, don't join if you don't want. It doesn't matter to me, except for the fact that I absolutely appreciate it so much, and I love the interaction with them more than anything else across all my outlets, because it's like a small, intimate community. Anyways, moving on to these controllers, I have the Radiomaster in the middle here. I have the Jumper, the previous real high value radio, on the left here, and I have the Taranis X9D Lite, X9 Lite on the right here. And so I'll give you the quick synopsis of this video. I like the Radiomaster controller a lot. I think it's well put together. I don't think it's the controller for me specifically. It may not be the controller for many people, but if there was a newcomer or somebody looking for a controller that wanted everything, the kitchen sink and all your neighbor's kitchen sinks also, this is the one I would recommend, because it's pretty well built. It's got everything imaginable, and it's $130 on launch, which is really, really impressive. And like I said, the Jumper here on the left was the previous kind of value king, and at this point in time, this is absolutely the value king without a doubt. Now, it's not the controller for me because it's relatively huge. I am not flying planes and helicopters and running robots and doing random stuff. I really just focus on quads and FPV and that kind of stuff, and so I don't need all this stuff, and I'd rather just have a little smaller controller. And there's a couple other reasons as well, which I'll get to, but for the most part, those are the reasons why this isn't going to be my primary controller, but it's going to be my primary kind of whoop or everything controller, because it does have these multi-module in the middle. If you're watching this video, I'm assuming you already know most of the features about this controller, but let's get a real bird's eye view of the internals and how the thing looks like on the inside compared to these other two controllers. And I'll say the reason why I decided to start with the internals here is because I flew this controller, flies fine, works fine, but then I wasn't really terribly impressed with it, but I mean, it's got everything and it works fine too. But I took it apart and then I looked on the inside, and then I was genuinely impressed with how it was put together and the attention to detail with the manufacturing and everything on the inside, and that's why I started with this first. So looking at this PC board really from a bird's eye view, don't get hyped up on this massive chip there. That's an F4 chip. As far as I know, any of these chips have various different formats that they come in. This particular format has a lot of I/O, and I think that's probably why they went with such a large chip, because it has so much I/O. Maybe it has some performance differences as well. I don't really know, but I basically know that don't get so hyped up on it. It's not a very powerful chip compared to like cell phones and things. Controllers are not really super duper high tech devices. They are heavily designed, but I mean, it's not a cell phone, obviously. We're not talking about something has millions of dollars behind it in manufacturing and advancement. But it is nice to look on the inside and see what they may have done to try and make it as good as they could make it. So first I'll point out that, I'll point out that I really like the PC board in here. It does look really nice. I am not an electrical engineer at all, but I have seen quite a few PC boards in my time, and to me, this board looks pretty nice. It's hard to gauge what kind of solder they use, what kind of SMT process they use, and how they bake the board and to get it to be together the way it is, but it's nice. To me, it looks like they spent a good deal of time engineering the board, and the process they're using to put it together looks pretty decent. Now, this board has a USB on the bottom here, as well as a USB on top here. The USB on the bottom here is primarily used for USB charging of the 2S LiPo, or 18650 cells, or whatever you want to power it by is 2S. Actually has a large battery bay, I'll show a little bit later. But the USB port on top here is primarily used for simulator support, which is super nice. Also, the 3.5 millimeter jack on the side here is for a buddy box flying, which I honestly haven't seen anybody do for a long time, so I don't know why they even put it there, but hey, it's got everything in, all the kitchen sinks in the neighborhood, so might as well put that in as well. Something I do want to point out is that all of the wires that are routed around here are very neatly routed, first of all, and they all have really nice connectors that I typically don't like on quads, but I do appreciate their ease of use and the convenience. But in controllers, they are nice to use, and they have all been glued together, except for this one, which is odd. But they're all glued together, and they're not coming apart anytime soon. The multi-module here has been soldered in place, whereas on the previous jumper model, there is a spot for it, it's just not soldered in place. And then the wire going to the antenna here is super nice and thick and robust, and it is UFL. And I like this thick wire because it retains the radio signal better, as you would expect. It shields things more, and then it exits the antenna with full power because it's retaining the signal inside the wire. Thinner wires, longer wires don't quite retain the same signal. You start getting attenuation of the signal as it goes down the wire. Now, other things I want to point out is the gimbals in here. The gimbals are actually Hall sensor gimbals. They're full Hall sensor gimbals. I believe they are Hall sensor. Yeah, these are Hall sensor gimbals. Definitely, I just took a look at the inside there. But what I actually want to show is the springs here and the spring tension. So I actually have mine tension to the max, and that's one of the reasons why. One of the other preferential reasons why this won't be the controller for me is because I actually prefer strong spring tension, not like ultra strong, but stronger than what this controller can provide. And it's just not quite there for me. So I prefer the FrSky X9D has a stronger spring in it. But the other thing I want to point out about these gimbals is that they're full travel gimbals, and the other two controllers have larger looking gimbal internals, but are not full travel gimbals, which is just, it hurts my head. And one thing about this controller, like I may have said, is that thing is huge, and for something that's so giant, to have such flat gimbals, it again hurts my head. But these are full travel gimbals. They are really nice. All the wiring is really nice on the inside. One thing I would point out is that these potentiometers, I don't actually know the part numbers of these potentiometers, so or the pots and like the spinning parts of the controller, so I can't really comment on whether those are good or bad. But let's move on to looking at the other parts. So this is the jumper controller. Quickly go over PVC wiring. The PC board looks cheaper to me. The ribbon cable, I'm not a big fan of the ribbon cables, but I wouldn't say that they are particularly less reliable, but they are much more difficult to work on if you do have to work on them. There's no module. Obviously, you can solder one in, but it doesn't come with one. It also has a USB port on top and not on the bottom. It does not have internal charging, but the USB port on top is a micro USB. No, actually, that's the old mini USB port, so it's kind of even more annoying. But the rest of it is fine. The gimbals are, like I said, bigger, and the springs are unfortunately not any more robust, but hey, the gimbals are bigger, so it's at least making use of the box space inside the controller. I would say that I like the Radiomaster more. Maybe I'm wrong, maybe I just don't know enough to be able to distinguish the processing of the inside, but I hate these PVC wires. And while I have zero issues with the potentiometers for the gimbals, I prefer the Hall sensors if possible. I've never had an issue with the potentiometers, but the Hall sensors are better over time, not immediately up front. They all feel the same, but after many hours of use, you start feeling a difference. The Hall sensor gimbals just tend to stay more fluid longer. They just have less scratching and grinding and whatnot. Moving on to the X9D, I just picked these three controllers because they were the ones on the top of my desk. When I look at the PC board in this controller, it looks to me that it's been engineered to kind of a higher, not a higher level, just has more engineering put into the board. It's just a lot tighter, and it seems like the routing is a little bit more difficult. And they are using a smaller processor. It doesn't necessarily mean it's worse. It is an F2 processor, but it is a very budget controller. But even with its budget nature, it just seems to have a lot, maybe a bit more engineering put into it. Again, I'm not an electrical engineer. I don't route boards. I don't do this for a living or even as a hobby. I've just seen a lot of PCBs, and I'm just giving you my bird's eye view. The wiring in this controller and the connectors in this controller are not bad, but the wiring and connectors in the Radiomaster controller just feel like higher quality connectors. However, the ones in the FrSky, the connectors are physically larger, so they would actually be easier to work on if you wanted to work on them. And the wires are silicone, but they just feel like thinner, more frail silicone wires. They look thicker, but they're not actually as nice feeling. They probably just have fewer strands on the inside, which makes them just feel a bit tougher. The gimbals on this are the Hall sensor gimbals for the X9 Lite. And when I look at the switches and potentiometer that's used on here for the whatever else is, they are, I've actually used them in other products. I know this potentiometer, I know the model number, if it's a real one at least. I don't know why they would make a fake version. I think that this is actually a pretty high quality one, and these switches also, I know them. I've used them in other products, not only seen them in controllers, and I actually like these switches as well. Now, I'm not a fan of any switches, and I've never had a relay or a switch just fail on me randomly, but they just feel nicer in the controller. Overall, this controller seems like a really good value because they have skimped out on things that they could, like the casing is really, really chintzy but thick plastic. Like it doesn't have much detailing, and it's just like a scaled down copy of the X9D. They really didn't put much effort into it, but they did put a good amount of effort, what looks like a good amount of effort into the board, and it looks like they made it more versatile to be used with other products maybe in the future as well. But overall, I think they did a really fantastic job putting together an amazing value controller. And if I was starting or looking for a controller, I didn't have all this other stuff already, I didn't have my pick of controllers, I would definitely get this because it just has everything in it, plus that multi-module, which is just so nice built in. And you could always get crossfire. I mean, it's $130 and it's got like everything on it. So yeah, if this is the controller for you, you probably already made up your mind. I think it's a great option. Not for me, not for everybody, but I think it's a great option. Oh yeah, as for the range of that multi-module, it's about the same as FrSky. The Beta FPV controller that is D16 and D8 only actually has much better range than any FrSky controller. I've actually sent that Beta FPV controller out to someone already, so I don't have it here to compare. But I think that thing is awesome. It's my previous video, and I've talked enough about this controller. Ask whatever questions you want. Kudos to Radiomaster for making such a high value product, and I do know that they're making other things as well. So I do definitely look forward to what they're making because clearly they know how to make a controller. Take care, floss your teeth. Bye-bye.